out, then they lost the license plate number. The lady had wrote it down, and after this ordeal, she didn't have the license plate number anymore either. And then roughly a month later, on September 5th, 1982, that's when Johnny was kidnapped on his paper route. And the people that were there that morning at the corner said that the only thing they saw in this guy's car was a brown manila envelope laying on the front seat. Whether it was a picture, whether it was a work order to kidnapping, or whatever it was, we presume it was probably both.
And at the time of the abduction, Johnny left the house at about 5:55 in the morning and headed towards the paper drop area. And when he got partway there, a man in a car had pulled over and asked him for directions. And then Johnny continued on the sidewalk up to the corner where the other boys were waiting to pick up their papers. The man then took off in his car and evidently circled way around our housing block and another one to come back to the same area and pull in up on 42nd Street, where Johnny and another boy and a 44-year-old attorney was standing. He was picking up his son's papers. The man pulled over to the curb, opened up the door, shut off the engine, and put his feet out on the ground and began to engage all of them in conversation. Mostly it was about asking for directions. And the two witnesses had a very, very good look at the man because it was under a street light. And that became very valuable later because they did work with a composite artist that we hired to construct the composite drawing, which the authorities now use. They don't use the one that they did. And the man was Mediterranean or Spanish, probably in his 40s, just impeccably dressed, very neat. The car was very neat. The witnesses had an exact description of the car. The man spoke with a very slurred speech pattern. At that point, the lawyer left the area, taking the papers with him for his sons. And our son made the statement to the other boy, you know, this guy's weird. There's something wrong here. I'm going home. He was scared. So Johnny took off down the street to head for home, which at that point he was headed north. And he had to go one block north and then turn and go another block west to get back up to our block. He got halfway down the street, and the boy that was sitting at the corner, who was 16, heard our dog begin to growl, who was walking along with Johnny. And at that point he looked up and he saw a very, very tall, thin man. He estimated him to be probably about 8 or 10 inches taller than Johnny. Came out from between two houses and fell in behind Johnny and followed him down the street and around the corner out of sight. Then just seconds later, two other boys approached from a different area to get their papers, and they witnessed Johnny sitting on his wagon slumped over like he was sick. They didn't wave at him and continued on. Nobody suspected impending danger. They got to the corner, and at that moment, they all heard the slamming of a car door and the screech of tires. And that same blue car came right through the stop sign, turned left, which was north, and headed out of town. The noise awakened a boy who was living at the corner in a house in the upstairs, and his bedroom window faced that street. And when he looked out, all he saw was Johnny's wagon and the car taking off. They'd already thrown him in the car. And with all of that evidence, we still did have difficulty getting an initial fast reaction and investigation started with the police. They wanted to tend to believe that any kid that age would run away. In the face of 5 witnesses that each saw a part of this whole kidnapping take place. It was an incredible situation.
The time frame basically was somewhere between 6:03 and 6:06 or 7 is when apparently Johnny was abducted. We didn't find out about it until 6:30 or somewhere in that area when one of our neighbors called and wanted to know where their Sunday paper was. Because Johnny always delivered the papers on time. And so I got my car, went up to the corner, found the wagon with the papers in it and paper bag and all these type of things. And came back home and I told Maureen, I says, call the police, there's something but his wagon's up there. And what even made me do that, instead of going around and looking and all around, but I just felt something was real, because the dog was back, and that was what really surprised me. Well, Mr. Dash, she had come back home.
And you see, Johnny was the type of kid that was very responsible. He had a perfect service award for every month that he had had the newspaper. So it wouldn't be like him to abandon a whole wagon full of newspapers and go lollygag in someplace. We knew our son, and we knew something was wrong immediately. It took about 45 minutes for the police to come over, and our house is 10 blocks from the police station. From the time I called the police until they got here, I had already called for our older son to be sent home from his place of employment because we knew that the family was going to have to pull together. I had called our daughter at college and made arrangements for her fiance to bring her right here. I had called the district manager at the newspaper, and I had found out the names of all the kids that picked up papers at the corner, and I had already had a phone conversation with them. And in that phone conversation, they described the man, the way he spoke, the car, the color of the car, what the man was wearing. Everything was very detailed because it was very fresh. And I had all that information before the police ever walked into the house. We weren't prepared for what was going to happen next, and that was basically nothing. I mean, it was up to John and I at that point in time to go to the press and beg for help in having them show Johnny's picture so that people knew he was missing. There was not the adequate measures taken initially.
The Des Moines Register was very concerned about who was going to be delivering the papers, like the next day. And
they told us we had to find a
we
replacement.
had to find a replacement. Under those situations, I told them where to put the papers.
And the press is... In August of 1984, and it was about 4 days before the Martin boy was kidnapped from Des Moines, I was asked to fly to Washington, D.C. and testify at a Senate hearing. And it was organized crime hearings and their possible connection to kidnap cases. I wasn't asked to come in for all of the missing children hearings, which had been held earlier in the year. But they had me come for this other one, which I thought was kind of strange at the time. But our private detective had been digging up a lot of information showing an overall network in the country, and that Johnny was a possible victim of that network as opposed to just a random pedophile running around Des Moines. So when I presented what we had in our case, the person that followed me in presenting was a member of the FBI, and what they had laid on a table about this size was nothing but one publication after another that had all been taken from a pedophile in a raid that the FBI conducted. One of the things was a book on how to molest small children without leaving marks on them. We're talking toddlers. How to coerce or abduct a child into a car. The how-to books that teach pedophiles to do this. Paraphernalia that would be used in some type of sexual torture for children. And then the other interesting thing that was there on the table was a book of pictures of kids who had not yet been kidnapped.
The statement was that you could order a kid out of that book.
And the interesting thing is that from time to time when we do hear of reports of children being photographed either on a playground and or walking to and from school or just whatever, in many cases there is an abduction attempt on the same child up to 3 weeks, a month, or 2 months later.
Did anybody give any indication of how much it cost to buy one? Because what I'm saying is that this is not going to be done cheaply, and it's not going to be done for free.
We've heard estimates of about $50,000 to $75,000 per child, depending on the features and the looks of that child, the innocence, prepubescent children. There are also, and this has been documented by a number of private investigators who researched it, that periodically auctions take place in the United States. Different places, they move around. They don't just set up shop in one spot and publish a notice that there's going to be an auction. It's done very secretively, and they might run 10 to 20 kids at a time through an auction block. And the buyers can be from foreign countries or whatever. And then the child would never have a hope of ever getting back to his own country.
There are internment camps